Let's learn about the basics about how to make a graffiti tag. Let's go. Quick shout out for Artify in sponsoring the materials for this video. We got their Expert Series tropical marker set. These are pretty sweet. Each marker has a chisel tip on the one end and then a fine tip on the other side. I've rocked some Artify markers in the past. I'm sure this set's gonna hold up great too. So honestly, my favorite tool to work with is a chisel tip when tagging. Just the little edge that you get there gives you that kind of calligraphy style. Bullet tips are fun, you know, kind of a fine point tip there. Easier to practice with maybe, but I'm gonna go through some of the stuff with the chisel tip in this video. The most common use of the chisel tip puts the nib kind of down at an angle. And you can see what that does is it kind of gives us this edge to it. So we've got all of our lines starting with that same angle. So you even have a super basic letter here, you can still get some nice structure to it. Doing that same tag with the point of the chisel tip. With the point of the chisel tip, you get what you'd have more so with like a fine tip or something, maybe a round nib. It's plain simple. You don't get a ton of flavor to it. You definitely see that the E is the main draw of all this, given that it has a little bit more complexity. You get a little bit more out of that letter, whereas these ones, because they're so simple, when you reduce it down to a skinny line, you lose a little bit there. Something to keep in mind here, the scale of the letter, you know, here we got these super narrow lines, definitely detracts a lot when we're working with this. If we were to shrink this tag down with that same rounded tip, I'm sure it'll look a little bit cleaner. What we've done there is almost merged back to what we're seeing over here, where we're boldening up the lines by reducing the size of that tag. So your specific tag style marker, or if you're just tagging with a ballpoint pen, will influence how your style kind of looks. You know, I do a ton of my practicing with chisel tips because that's the look and feel that my style goes after. The softer, rounder stuff isn't my norm. I still mess around with it, but keep that in mind. Your tools in this case can inform where you're going. So let's do another tag with that same penmanship. Add a couple embellishments on there, change it up a little. But you can see we got a similar pacing to it. You know, all of our angles here are the same. If you rotate that chisel tip though, you're gonna change the entire tag style really quickly. So now we're kind of going for a vertical. So you can see we got kind of a almost saucier E. I like this E a little bit better, but by putting the tip vertical, our S and our I and a V, those have so many vertical parts to their letter, it got all skinny and narrow and kind of weird. So you can play with that throughout your tag. Maybe your E looks a little bit better if you tilt your arm up as you go through the finishings of it. Or if your I, you kind of like that narrow style, by all means go for that. I much prefer the kind of choppiness that the 45-degree angle gives for me. Keeping those things in mind as you're designing your tag and as you're actually working through it gives you that kind of understanding of where you should play around with. So I went ahead and did another kind of vertical style. Looks way wonky, but if we go back to our 45-degree angle, these same structures can look real sweet. The 45-degree angle can work really easy, so that's my best suggestion, is go for that on your starter letters, pick simple structures, and then practice those. Stay away from the vertical stuff. That kind of gets a little sloppy in my opinion, unless you're kind of working that into your style or have some letters that seemingly benefit a lot from that. I definitely opt to stay for some stuff that keeps the angle all consistent, 45, and then another last little bit is don't move your fingers so much. Try to get the pacing down with just your hand. And what happens when you do that is you're able to focus a little bit more on exactly where that pen is going and less of like trying to extend it out and catch other things up. You know, what I find to happen when I go for a tag that has these large extents, I might get lazy and push my fingers out there, but that gives you a totally separate feel to where the actual like style is coming from. It's easy then to lose some of these edge shapes, and then your inconsistencies are all over the place. Let me see if I can try and show that here. You can see here I'm trying to plant my hand and then just kind of make all the extents and all the shaping with my finger movements. And I see this with a ton of beginners where they're pushing and pulling a ton with their fingers, and it's just so much harder to control evenly. That E actually turned out pretty good. So you can do it, that's for sure, but in my opinion, it's a little bit more consistent to let your hand do all the work there. It keeps the kind of friction also on the page a little bit more consistent because you're also pushing your hand through all that friction rather than just trying to control the friction of the nib. So work with that as best you can. Try to find what works for you. And obviously there are tons of tag styles like a Wicked where it's almost all in the fingers. So this is kind of specific to your entry level little calligraphy style, and hopefully this will get you started. We ought to round out the bottom corner with one more. You can see I'm definitely warming up a little bit here. Let's hit some sticker tags. See, I've broken into some of these already. So fun to hit up some stickers, get your practice going. Something great to think about is the actual spacing between your letters and how that influences what your tag looks like. Right now we're using a fairly good sized nib here, but when I stack all my letters on top of one another, if you didn't see me write each of these out, you probably would have a hard time justifying that it says Sive at all. Try to spread those out a little bit and give each letter room to breathe. So here we have basically no crisscross over top of any of my letters. And in all honesty, that looks a little bit spread out. You know, we got some pretty wonkiness with the sizing of each letter anyways, but you can actually read it, which is kind of important here. Depending on the letter you have, that spacing can change. I'm going to simplify the letters up a little bit and try to get my spacing down. So that worked out pretty good. We got a little bit of smallness on that V, so maybe we'll add a hat to it to fill it in a little. But you can see we're almost touching in a lot of these places. The I overlaps a little bit, but down here in the I and the V interchange, you know, they're just coming close contact. The E's coming in close contact. And what that allows us to do is still maintain like the little back portion of that E. It's still important to see that, and it helps give more flavor to the E, and it doesn't kind of squish it in and get washed away. And with the I, you can kind of see the opposite of that. The edge of this letter is washed out because it's totally covered by where the S was. Your I has a hard time telling whether or not, you know, your S is to take priority there or where the bottom of this I is supposed to terminate inside the S. It just has to make that up because you've now covered it up. So it's really important to think about most line ends want to be exposed throughout a piece. You don't want to bury them together because then you kind of work into this where it gets all muddied up. You don't even know where the top of that E is going or where the bottom of this I is going. It just condenses things way too great. Let's try to do a tag here where we fit all the ends of our letters free from overlapping something else. In my opinion, out of this grouping, this tag is definitely my favorite. We could even go as far as embellish our I up a little bit, maybe drop our V in there, and it doesn't quite kill much of anything in the E, even though it's overlapping there. It's because it's kind of that intermediate part of the E. You got a nice round, and it picks up again right where your I kind of expects it to land. Whereas when it's a funky portion or it's a styled portion of your letter, if you aren't explicit about telling the reader where that's supposed to go, they make assumptions, and sometimes that assumption is not great. So when you have a simple style like this, it's really important to space your letters appropriately. And one really easy way to do that is kind of italicize your letters. So let's take a look at that. Like a straightforward, let's do a straightforward first. Really, really basic. But what if we italicize all our letters? You can see things got a little bit squished there. Maybe let's try the italicized the other direction. Basically, what's that doing? That's shifting all of our verticals kind of to the left at 45 degrees or so. But what that also helps you do is, even with a base text where there's not much style to it, it allows you to have a little bit extra room for these important portions of the letter. So naturally, a lot of graffiti does take this style where things are slanted and coming down at an angle, because it gives you a little bit more space from the standard block where two similar letters next to each other aren't as like forced to be spread apart. Like this S and this I, by putting that I only to the right of the furthest extent of the S, you don't have like a lot of use of all this dead space in here. Whereas when you shift it, now you can get that I really kitty cornered up against the S without still going over it. So you get like a little bit extra flavor while also not ruining the terminations of your line ends. Now you can take that base and build it up and add some flair to it. So I might, I've got all the free range to do down here on the left. My S has got nothing else going on. We can add a big old tail to it. Maybe a big flame at the top. And now I'm going to keep my I coming down at that angle. And what I also now am open to is I can kind of like downset the I. So it's offset and down a little bit. Now I can take use of this underside of the S. So I've now made a pretty sweet I that is not overlapping my S at all. You can read both those letters perfectly. And then the icing on that is now you have a repeating style between all your letters so that they each have a little bit of similar flow. That spacing is especially important with kind of the more square letters like your I's or your B's, because they have a lot of information that needs to be included or they're going to get kind of sloppy and lost in there. To reiterate that, let me draw, an I and a B next to one another. Both are important because you got full rounds coming around here. If we start to add some flavor to those, you now all of a sudden have a ton of extra detail. And situations like this where you might want that hit from the bottom side of that vertical now gets all messy because your I and your B are kind of competing with one another. But what if we just offset them a little bit? So now your I is able to sit freestanding and you kind of just tuck the B in there. So it's something to play around with. Obviously, the specifics of your letters matter a lot with this, because the core of it is you can really make any name stylized well. You just kind of have to know how each pairing of the letters work. I'll show a quick alphabet, although that doesn't quite show you how to use letters in kind of their common combination, but then we'll get into working off some of your guys' tag names. I did a little poll, so I've got a ton of different tags to work from, and we can show you how different letters work with different ones and how I might try to piece them together so that they complement each other rather than kind of butt heads and get all messy in the interior. It's kind of crazy when you're doing a bunch of tags how rhythmic it can kind of get. I know for myself, I get kind of lost sometimes when I'm just going through the paces, and I'll go 2 tags, 3 tags in a row, and they'll all kind of look bad. And it's one of those, it's like you really sometimes have to go so slow and think about each and every stroke, because you can get into that pacing where you're just, kind of in the muscle memory of it all, and you're kind of just hitting the next line that you're used to hitting, and you're not thinking about where you're placing it. You're kind of just going through the motions. And I find when I'm, maybe doing a fat stack of stickers or something like this, I'll get a couple tags in and find myself back at that place where I'm really not even like thinking about the tag at all. I'm just going at it. And although that might make like the current tag kind of crappy, it's probably also why it's like so fun to watch other people who do hit ups, and why it's so fun to just like get into the zone and do it. Because you can kind of just like get into the momentum of it all, and you don't really even have to think about it. And sometimes you're hitting 6 or 7 in a row that are all super clean, and you hit all the kind of interchanges perfect. And then other times it's like, oh, you're just going through the motions, and the first one looks bad, the next 10 also look bad. So it's kind of a fun con there, where if you don't have like a good starting point to go after, you could do just 15 in a row that aren't great. But if you have a nice kind of pacing that you can get into a rhythm for, that does look really good, maybe you'll hit those 10 in a row and you'll just kind of catch that momentum and ride it. I definitely find myself practicing sometimes and kind of getting loose in it, and that's fun too. You just kind of have a loose session. But whenever I'm trying to practice and like focus down on doing a new style, I go like so slow, maybe 10 times slower. I'm doing, one tag every minute. I'm thinking about each letter for a couple seconds, and this is pretty well sped up and chopped up to like just those high points. But maybe we'll hit this tag now in like real time, where I'm going and kind of thinking about it. I'm kind of planning out my next step. And for like the sticker side of things, practicing every tag on a sticker means now you have a means to get up with every tag that you practice. So I kind of fell into those paces when I was first starting, that it was super easy for me to just hit a bunch of stickers and pass those stickers out. And it was a fun way to like get better with each and every one, but also have like a means of getting up a little bit while I'm just working at home. If you're down for some of these blanks, the Hell of My Name is the cult classic. Got some of those on the shop and picked up the gold and red badges, of course, because what doesn't look good with a little gold border on it? It's always crazy to me to see the different letter combinations that people come up with for their own tag names. I did that poll, so I got probably 200 different names and maybe hit up 100 in the video. And it is fun to plan out and try to study the structure of some other names. As a fun exercise, leave your tag down in the comment section. And then if you guys are watching this video, you can go through, read those comments, and maybe pick out some other tags to try, because you can learn a lot about how other letters work and then bring that back to your own name. It's so fun to just hit up other people, feel some stuff out. Maybe you'll learn a thing about their letter based on some of the other things that it forces it to be next to. And in all honesty, it's great to have a strong alphabet when it comes to many different letters, so it's a win-win all the way across. So definitely leave your tag down in the comment section. Maybe I'll pick from some of those to hit up the next time, as well as everybody else can practice on them too. Alright, that's going to do it for me, guys. Join me next time where we get messy with some mops. Peace.